The hospital bed felt cold against my back. An IV tube snaked from my arm to a bag hanging above me. Heart monitors beeped softly in the background. The sterile smell of disinfectant filled my nostrils, mixing with the anxiety that had been building for weeks. My phone buzzed, and I saw my manager's name on the screen. "Chad?" I answered, my voice shaky from the pre-surgery medication they'd given me an hour ago. "Paula, I don't care what's going on. We all have things happening in our lives." His voice was sharp, cutting through the sterile hospital air like a knife. "If you don't show up tomorrow, don't bother coming back." I tried to explain that I was literally in a hospital bed, scheduled for emergency surgery in 6 hours. The nurses had already marked me as NPO, nothing by mouth, and drawn circles on my abdomen where the surgeon would make incisions. But he had already hung up. The next morning, while I was being wheeled into the operating room, my phone buzzed with an email. Through blurry vision, I read the subject line, "Employment termination, effective immediately." They fired me while I was under anesthesia. As the anesthesia wore off hours later, I stared at that email again. Tears rolled down my cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, burning fury. Chad had just made the biggest mistake of his career. 14 days earlier, life at Newbridge Solutions had been completely different. I'd worked there for 5 years, managing client accounts for our mid-sized logistics firm. My clients loved me. My work was efficient and thorough. I kept my head down and did my job well. I had a perfect attendance record and had received raises every year since starting. Then Chad arrived. He came from some big corporate firm downtown, strutting into our modest office like he owned the place. Everything about him screamed arrogance, from his expensive suits to the way he talked down to everyone. He wore gold cufflinks and checked his phone constantly during meetings, as if our small company business was beneath his attention. During my first meeting with him, he looked at my client portfolio and snorted. "These numbers are adequate, I guess, but we need to think bigger, Paula." He spoke without making eye contact, typing on his laptop while dismissing my hard work. I'd increased our client retention rate by 15% that quarter. "You're not exactly leadership material, are you?" he said, finally looking up with a condescending smirk that made my stomach turn. The words hit me like a slap. Around the conference table, my coworkers shifted uncomfortably. Nobody spoke up. That should have been my first warning sign about what was coming. Chad had been there exactly 3 days, and he'd already decided I wasn't worth his time. Over the next week, Chad made my life miserable. He'd assign me projects with impossible deadlines, then act shocked when I asked for clarification. Every email I sent got picked apart with red ink corrections. Every client call got questioned, as if I hadn't been successfully managing these relationships for years. "Paula, this report is sloppy," he'd announce loudly, making sure everyone heard. "I need you to redo the entire thing by tomorrow morning." He'd wave the pages dramatically, ensuring maximum humiliation. The report was fine. I'd been doing the same format for 3 years, and clients consistently praised my thoroughness and clarity. My coworkers started avoiding me. During lunch breaks, they'd whisper apologies when Chad wasn't around. "We're sorry he's targeting you," my cubicle neighbor Alex whispered. "But we can't afford to get on his bad side, too." I tried talking to HR about Chad's behavior, but they seemed scared of him, too. "He's new," the HR director said nervously, avoiding eye contact. "Give him time to adjust to our company culture." Her hands shook slightly as she shuffled papers on her desk. Meanwhile, I was developing severe stomach pains. At first I thought it was stress from Chad's constant harassment. The knots in my stomach seemed to tighten every time I heard his voice. But the pain kept getting worse, sharp and stabbing, especially after meals. I scheduled a doctor's appointment for the following week. The doctor's face was serious as she looked at my test results. Her expression immediately told me this wasn't going to be good news. She pulled up images on her computer screen, pointing to several dark spots with her pen. "Paula, you have gallstones, several large ones. We need to schedule surgery immediately, within the next week." My stomach dropped. Emergency surgery meant time off work. Time off work meant dealing with Chad. I thought about his constant threats about productivity and his obvious dislike for anything that disrupted his rigid schedule. I drove straight to the office and knocked on Chad's door, rehearsing what I'd say. The nameplate still looked brand new compared to the worn ones on other doors. I need to submit medical leave paperwork. I'm having emergency surgery next Friday. Chad barely looked up from his computer. Surgery? For what? His tone suggested he thought I was making it up. Gallstones. The doctor says it can't wait. They're causing blockages. He leaned back in his chair, smirking like I'd just told him a bad joke. You know, Paula, the team can't afford your absence right now. We're in the middle of quarterly reviews. I pulled out the medical leave forms I'd printed from HR's website. This is protected under federal law. I've already scheduled the surgery. Chad's eyes narrowed dangerously. You'll need to find coverage for all your accounts or reconsider the timing. Reconsider the timing? I stared at him in disbelief. It's emergency surgery, he shrugged casually. Emergencies are inconvenient for business, Paula. Figure it out. I submitted my medical leave paperwork to HR that afternoon. The forms were complete, signed by my doctor, with surgery scheduled for the following Friday. Everything was by the book. I made copies of everything and even got a receipt showing the exact time I'd submitted the documents. On Monday, Chad called me into his office. I can't seem to find your medical forms anywhere. Did you actually submit them? He spread his hands with fake innocence, but I caught a slight smirk. Yes, I handed them directly to the HR director on Friday afternoon at 3:15 p.m. Well, they're not in the system. He shrugged as if paperwork just disappeared on its own. I can't approve leave for paperwork that doesn't exist. I marched to HR, my heart pounding with frustration. The director looked uncomfortable when I asked about my forms. Oh, those forms? Chad said there were some issues with them. He's handling your case directly now. She wouldn't meet my eyes and kept fidgeting with her pen. Issues? What kind of issues? You'll have to ask Chad. Back in Chad's office, he was typing an email, making me stand there for 5 minutes before acknowledging me. The deliberate disrespect was obvious. The team simply can't function without proper coverage, Paula. You need to postpone your surgery or find someone to handle your entire workload. My pain had gotten worse over the weekend. Standing there, I felt another sharp stab in my side that made me wince. I can't postpone emergency surgery, I said through gritted teeth. Chad shrugged with complete indifference. Then you'd better work faster to get everything organized. Tuesday morning, I was presenting our quarterly client retention report to the team when the pain hit like lightning. Sharp, stabbing agony that made me double over mid-sentence. Paula? Alex jumped up from his chair. Are you okay? I couldn't speak. The pain was so intense I couldn't breathe. Black spots danced in my vision as I collapsed onto the conference room floor. Someone called 911. As the paramedics loaded me onto a stretcher, I heard Chad telling the team, "Well, I guess we'll have to finish this presentation without her." At the hospital, the emergency doctor took one look at my scans and shook his head. "You need surgery immediately. These gallstones are causing a blockage. We're scheduling you for tomorrow morning." From my hospital bed, I called Chad to explain the situation. The doctor says, "I need emergency surgery tomorrow. I won't be able to come in." This is really inconvenient timing, Paula. His voice was cold. I'm disappointed in your lack of commitment to the team. Then he hung up on me. 10 minutes later, my phone chimed with an email marked "Final Warning." I woke up Thursday morning, groggy and disoriented. The surgery had taken longer than expected. My abdomen was wrapped in bandages, and everything felt fuzzy from the anesthesia. A nurse was checking my IV when my phone buzzed. "Should I read this email to you, honey? You got something from your work." Still half asleep, I nodded. It says, "Your employment has been terminated effective immediately for job abandonment. Please return all company property within 48 hours. The nurse's voice trailed off. "Honey, did they just fire you while you were in surgery?" My hospital roommate, an older woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, sat up in her bed. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing. I'm a retired HR compliance officer. What you just described is completely illegal." Through my post-surgery haze, I felt a spark of hope. "They can't fire someone for taking protected medical leave," Mrs. Rodriguez continued. "Do you have documentation of your surgery and the medical necessity?" I nodded weakly. "Then you need to call a lawyer immediately. What your manager did violates federal law." Mrs. Rodriguez gave me the number for a legal aid clinic that handled employment cases. When I called, they connected me with Maria Santos, a lawyer who specialized in wrongful termination. "Tell me everything," Maria said. I explained Chad's harassment, the denied medical leave, being fired while under anesthesia. Maria listened carefully, taking notes. "Paula, this is a clear violation of the Family and Medical Leave Act. Your employer was legally required to hold your job during medical leave. We need to gather all your documentation immediately." I started collecting evidence. Every email Chad had sent, every text message, every witness to his behavior. The medical forms I'd submitted that mysteriously disappeared. My performance reviews from before Chad arrived. Then I remembered something important. I pulled up my employee handbook on my phone and found Section 4.7. Medical leave is protected under federal law. Employees cannot be terminated or disciplined for taking approved medical leave. Chad had violated the company's own policy. "This is excellent," Maria said when I showed her. "But we need more. Can you think of anyone who witnessed Chad's behavior or would be willing to testify?" I thought about my coworkers who had whispered apologies but stayed silent during meetings. It was time to find out who would actually stand up for what was right. I requested my complete employee file from HR. When it arrived, I was shocked. My file was missing 3 years' worth of positive performance reviews. All that remained were Chad's recent negative evaluations. But I'd kept copies of everything at home. Going through my files, I found something even more damaging. In a team meeting transcript from Chad's second week, he'd said, "Upper management wants me to trim the fat before the end of the quarter. We need to make this department more efficient." I remembered something else. After collapsing during the presentation, I'd heard Chad make a comment to someone. But I couldn't remember exactly what he'd said. I called Alex, my former cubicle neighbor. "Alex, I need to ask you about something. When I collapsed during the meeting, did Chad say anything after the paramedics took me away?" There was a long pause. "Paula, I probably shouldn't tell you this." "Please, Alex, I was just fired while having emergency surgery." He said, "Well, that's a convenient excuse to get out of work." And then he laughed. My hands shook as I wrote down Alex's words. Chad had called my emergency surgery a convenient excuse. "Alex, would you be willing to testify about what you heard?" Another pause. I have a family, Paula. I can't afford to lose my job too." Maria filed our first legal letter on Monday morning. We demanded my immediate reinstatement, back pay, and compensation for medical expenses incurred due to workplace stress. Newbridge Solutions responded within 48 hours with a generic denial letter. Miss Paula was terminated for legitimate business reasons. The company denies all allegations of wrongdoing. But then something unexpected happened. That evening, I received an anonymous email from a Gmail account I didn't recognize. "Paula, I can't identify myself, but I work at Newbridge. You weren't Chad's only target, there are others. Check with Melissa from accounting and Tracy from customer service. Both were pushed out in the last 6 months. Also, save this email address. I might have more information for you later." A friend. I immediately looked up Melissa and Tracy on LinkedIn. Both had left Newbridge within the past 6 months. Both had worked there for several years before Chad arrived. I sent them careful messages explaining my situation and asking if they'd be willing to talk. Melissa responded within an hour. "Paula, I've been waiting for someone to speak up about Chad. Can we talk tomorrow?" Melissa and I met at a coffee shop across town. She was in her 40s, well-dressed, professional. When she saw me, her face immediately softened with sympathy. "I heard what happened to you," she said. "Chad is a monster." "What happened with your situation?" I asked. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "I was pregnant, started having complications in my second trimester. My doctor put me on bed rest for 2 weeks." "Did you submit medical leave forms?" "Of course. But Chad kept calling me at home, demanding I come in for urgent matters. When I explained I was on doctor-ordered bed rest, he said I was being dramatic about my pregnancy." My stomach churned. "What happened?" "I lost the baby," Melissa whispered. "The stress Chad put me under. My doctor said it might have been a contributing factor. A week after I came back to work, Chad wrote me up for poor performance during a difficult period. I quit rather than fight him." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Melissa, I'm so sorry. There's more, she continued. Tracy from customer service had a similar experience. Her mother was dying of cancer. Chad made her life hell for taking time to care for her. Tracy agreed to meet us the next day. Her story was even worse than Melissa's. My mother had terminal cancer, Tracy explained, her voice shaking. I'd been with the company for 8 years, never missed work unless it was an emergency. When Mom got really bad, I asked for intermittent leave under FMLA to take her to chemotherapy appointments. Did Chad approve it? I asked. He told me that family obligations shouldn't interfere with professional responsibilities. He started scheduling mandatory meetings during every appointment I had blocked off for my mother's treatment. Tracy pulled out her phone and showed us a text message from Chad. Your mother's situation is unfortunate, but the company can't revolve around your personal problems. My mother died last month, Tracy continued. Chad denied my request for bereavement leave, said the company only approved leave for immediate family, and technically, my mother didn't qualify since I was adopted. I stared at her. That's completely illegal. I know that now, but at the time, I was grieving and couldn't think straight. I quit the day after my mother's funeral. Melissa leaned forward. Tracy, show her the other thing. Tracy hesitated, then pulled out a folded piece of paper. I printed this before I left. It's a memo Chad sent to upper management. The memo was titled Productivity Enhancement Strategy. In it, Chad wrote, medical absences disrupt our productivity culture and should be minimized whenever possible. Armed with testimonies from Melissa and Tracy, Maria filed formal complaints with both the Department of Labor and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The complaints detailed a pattern of discrimination against employees who needed medical leave. Within a week, Newbridge Solutions received official notices that they were under federal investigation. I heard through my anonymous contact that Chad was furious. He'd stormed into a meeting with the company's vice president, shouting, I won't be scapegoated for doing my job. These women are just looking for a payday. According to my source, the VP had turned pale when Chad said this in front of 2 other executives. Chad doesn't realize how bad he looks right now, my anonymous friend wrote. Upper management is starting to panic. They're hiring an outside law firm to handle the investigation. The investigation meant Newbridge had to preserve all documents related to my case. No more mysteriously disappearing paperwork. But Chad wasn't done fighting. That afternoon, I received a LinkedIn message from him. You're messing with the wrong person, Paula. This won't end well for you. I immediately forwarded the message to Maria. This is witness intimidation, she said. Chad just handed us more evidence. My story started gaining attention beyond just legal circles. A local journalist named Kevin Torres, who was writing a series about toxic workplaces, reached out to Maria asking if I'd be willing to speak anonymously. I agreed to an interview under the condition that neither I nor Newbridge would be named in the article. I was fired while under anesthesia for emergency surgery, I told Kevin. My manager called my medical emergency a convenient excuse to avoid work. Kevin's article, titled The Hidden Cost of Toxic Management, was published online and immediately started gaining traction. People shared it on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. The article didn't name Newbridge specifically, but Kevin had included enough details that anyone in our industry would recognize the company. Former Newbridge employees began commenting on the article with their own stories. I worked there for 6 years. Management turned toxic after they hired a new director who came from corporate consulting, one comment read. Same company, I think. I was written up for taking my daughter to the emergency room during work hours, another person shared. Within 48 hours, the article had over 50 comments from current and former Newbridge employees sharing similar experiences. The negative attention forced Newbridge's PR team into damage control mode. They issued a corporate statement. Newbridge Solutions takes employee wellness seriously and is committed to maintaining a supportive work environment for all team members. The statement backfired spectacularly. Former employees flooded the comments section of the company's social media posts with their own horror stories about Chad's management style. Supportive work environment? They fired someone during surgery, one person wrote. I was threatened with termination for taking my father to dialysis. another commented. The company's LinkedIn post about their commitment to employee wellness received over 200 negative comments before they disabled commenting entirely. According to my anonymous source, Newbridge's board of directors called an emergency meeting for Friday morning. Chad's management practices were officially on the agenda. The board members are asking questions about legal liability, my source wrote. Some big clients have been asking questions too. Word is getting around. I felt a mix of satisfaction and nervousness. Chad was finally facing consequences, but I knew he wouldn't go down without a fight. 3 of Newbridge's largest clients began asking questions about the company's employment practices. One client, who I'd managed for 4 years, called the company directly asking what happened to me. When they were told I was no longer with the company, the client pressed for details. Eventually, someone let slip that I'd been terminated for attendance issues. The client knew me well enough to know that was impossible. I'd never missed a meeting or deadline in 4 years of managing their account. Word spread through industry networks. 3 clients put their contract renewals on hold, citing concerns about company culture and employee treatment. Newbridge's quarterly revenue projections took an immediate hit. Meanwhile, my anonymous source sent me another update. Chad is freaking out. He's blaming everyone but himself. Yesterday, he screamed at the HR director for not protecting him from frivolous complaints. Newbridge's legal team reached out to Maria with their first settlement offer. $30,000 and a non-disclosure agreement. I looked at the number and laughed. They fired me while I was under anesthesia, and they think $30,000 makes it okay? Maria smiled grimly. We're just getting started. Tell them we'll consider discussing settlement after they reach 6 figures. Maria had been building our case methodically, and she'd uncovered something devastating. Through the legal discovery process, she'd obtained recordings of several team meetings where Chad had made inappropriate comments. Listen to this, Maria said, playing an audio file on her phone. Chad's voice came through clearly. Paula's medical situation is disruptive to team morale. We need to consider whether she's still a good fit for our productivity goals. This was recorded 2 days before my surgery, but the most damaging evidence came from Chad himself. Maria had requested all voicemails related to my case, and Chad had left several messages with HR that he apparently forgot about. In one voicemail, Chad said, if Paula tries to claim this was a legal termination, we just stick to the story that her performance was declining. I've already documented enough issues to support that narrative. He's admitting to fabricating documentation, Maria explained. This recording alone could win our case. When Newbridge's lawyers heard the recordings, they immediately requested another settlement meeting. This time, they came with a different attitude entirely. The second settlement meeting felt completely different from the first. Newbridge's legal team looked nervous, constantly whispering to each other and checking their phones. Our client is prepared to offer Miss Paula $75,000 to resolve this matter, their lead attorney said. Not even close, Maria responded. Your client violated federal law by firing my client during emergency surgery. This case is going to trial unless we see a serious offer. During a break in negotiations, I overheard one of Newbridge's lawyers on a phone call. The recordings are bad, really bad. Chad basically admits to retaliating against her for taking medical leave. When they came back to the table, their tone had changed again. What would it take to resolve this today? The lead attorney asked. Maria slid a piece of paper across the table. Complete reinstatement, full back pay, $200,000 in damages, a written apology acknowledging wrongdoing, and Chad's immediate termination. The lawyers looked at each other. We'll need to discuss this with our client. That evening, my anonymous source sent me an urgent message. Major drama at the office today. Word is that the board is meeting tomorrow to discuss Chad's future. Several board members are saying he's become a liability. I didn't have to wait long for news about the board meeting. According to my source, it was a complete disaster for Chad. He walked into the boardroom thinking he was going to get support, my friend wrote. Instead, they confronted him with all the evidence from your case. The recordings, the threatening LinkedIn message, everything. Chad apparently tried to defend himself by claiming I was a disgruntled employee trying to damage the company. But the board had already heard from the clients who were threatening to leave. One board member asked him directly, "Did you fire an employee while she was having emergency surgery?" Chad said yes, but claimed it was justified because I had abandoned my responsibilities. The meeting lasted less than an hour. Chad was called back in and told his employment was terminated immediately for cause. He cleaned out his office this afternoon, my source continued. Security escorted him out. He was screaming about wrongful termination as they walked him to his car. The irony wasn't lost on me. Chad, who had fired me illegally, was now claiming his own termination was wrongful. But Newbridge wasn't done making changes. The entire HR department was restructured, and they hired an outside firm to audit their employment practices. With Chad gone, Newbridge's attitude towards settlement changed dramatically. They were now desperate to avoid a public trial that would expose their internal problems. Maria and I met with their legal team one final time. The lead attorney looked exhausted. "Miss Paula, our client deeply regrets the circumstances of your termination. We're prepared to offer full reinstatement to your previous position, complete back pay, $350,000 in compensatory damages, and a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing." I looked at Maria, who nodded slightly. "We also require a guarantee that all employees involved in retaliation against Miss Paula face appropriate consequences," Maria added. "Already done. The HR director who enabled Mr. Chad's behavior has been terminated. We've also implemented new policies to ensure this never happens again." The final settlement was more than I had ever imagined, but the money wasn't what mattered most to me. "I want a written statement acknowledging that my termination was illegal," I said, "and I want it posted publicly." "We can do that," the attorney agreed. When we signed the settlement agreement, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Newbridge published their public acknowledgement on their website and social media accounts. Newbridge Solutions acknowledges that the termination of Paula Martinez was improper and violated federal employment law. "We sincerely apologize to Ms. Martinez and have taken steps to ensure this situation never occurs again." The statement was shared hundreds of times across social media. Former employees commented with messages of support and their own stories of workplace discrimination. Local news picked up the story. A reporter called me for an interview, and I decided it was time to speak publicly about what had happened. "I was fired while under anesthesia for emergency surgery," I told the reporter. "No employee should ever have to choose between their health and their job." The interview aired during the evening news and was posted online. Within days, it had been viewed over 100,000 times. I started receiving messages from employees at other companies who were facing similar situations. Many asked for advice on how to document workplace retaliation and when to contact lawyers. I realized my case could help other people who were being bullied by toxic managers. With the settlement money, I decided to start my own HR consulting company, focused on employee rights and workplace compliance. I called it Fair Workplace Solutions. My first clients were small businesses who wanted to make sure their employment practices were legal and ethical. Word spread quickly through professional networks about my expertise in employment law and my personal experience fighting workplace discrimination. Melissa and Tracy both reached out asking if I needed help building the business. I hired them as my first employees. "It feels good to work for someone who actually values employees," Melissa said on her first day. Within 6 months, Fair Workplace Solutions had 20 clients and was growing rapidly. We specialized in helping companies create genuinely supportive work environments while protecting them from legal liability. The most satisfying part was when former Newbridge employees started reaching out. 5 people who had quit under Chad's management asked if we could help them with their own potential legal cases. "Chad wasn't just targeting you," one former employee told me. "He was systematically pushing out anyone he saw as weak or inconvenient." A year after my settlement, I was invited to speak at a national conference on workplace ethics. The audience was filled with HR professionals, employment lawyers, and business executives. Employment law exists to protect workers from exactly what happened to me, I told the audience. But laws only work when people are willing to stand up and enforce them. I shared my story, from being fired during surgery to building a successful business that helped other employees. The audience gave me a standing ovation. After my presentation, a woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "I'm going through something similar at my job. My manager is retaliating against me for taking maternity leave. I didn't know I could fight back until I heard your story." I gave her Maria's contact information and assured her that she had rights worth fighting for. That's when I realized the real impact of my case wasn't just getting justice for myself. It was showing other employees that they didn't have to accept illegal treatment from toxic managers. Through industry contacts, I heard what happened to Chad after Newbridge fired him. He tried to find another management position, but word had spread about his employment practices. During background checks, potential employers kept finding references to the lawsuit and his illegal termination practices. No reputable company wanted to hire someone with his track record. According to LinkedIn, he'd eventually taken a job at a much smaller company for significantly less money. Even there, he only lasted 6 months before being let go again. "He's basically unemployable in this industry now," a former colleague told me. "Everyone knows what he did to you and the other employees." I felt a mixture of satisfaction and pity. Chad had destroyed his own career through his illegal and unethical behavior. Meanwhile, Newbridge had completely restructured their management practices. They'd hired a new director who implemented employee-friendly policies and created multiple channels for reporting workplace problems. Several former employees had returned to work there under the new management. 2 years after my surgery, I was back in a hospital room, but this time as a volunteer. I'd started a program to help patients understand their employment rights if they faced workplace retaliation for medical issues. "You were fired while having surgery?" a patient asked me, shocked. "Yes, but I fought back and won. And now I help other people do the same thing." Fair Workplace Solutions had grown to 50 employees across 3 states. We'd helped over 200 companies improve their employment practices and assisted dozens of workers who faced discrimination. But the most meaningful moment came when Alex, my former cubicle neighbor, reached out to apologize. "I should have stood up for you when Chad was targeting you," he said. "I was scared for my own job, but that was no excuse." "It's okay, Alex. Not everyone can risk their livelihood to fight injustice. That's why we need laws and lawyers to protect workers." As I drove home that evening, I thought about everything that had changed since that awful day when Chad fired me during surgery. I didn't just get justice for myself. I'd made sure it would never happen to the next Paula.